The term Puer Aeternus is Latin for eternal boy. It first appears in the Metamorphoses, written by the Roman poet Ovid, where the child god Iacchus is praised for his role in the Eleusinian mysteries initiations connected to Greek goddesses and among the most famous secret religious rites of ancient Greece. In later periods, this child god became identified with Bacchus, another name for Dionysus, and with Eros. He embodies life, death, and resurrection, the god of divine youth itself. Swiss psychiatrist and psychologist Carl Jung revived this mythological term and applied it to the psychology of eternal youth and the creative child that exists within every person. When the subject is female, the Latin term becomes puella aeterna, the archetype and its dual nature. The Puer Aeternus is an archetype, a primordial structural element of the psyche, and like all archetypes, it possesses both positive and negative aspects. It can infuse adult life with the energy, beauty, and creativity of childhood, or it can thwart self-realization and trap us in unrealistic adolescent fantasies while making life feel like a prison. The eternal youth archetype is the first we experience in life and remains vital throughout our entire existence. It shares a close relationship with the mother archetype. A puer or puer resists individuation, fighting against the inner drive toward psychological wholeness. This resistance stunts growth. Though they possess great imagination and a rich inner life, they fail to bring it into consciousness and thus make no progress in life. Their potential remains hidden and unused, stored away in the depths of the unconscious. In The Matrix, the protagonist Neo faces a choice between a red pill and a blue pill. The blue pill allows him to remain content and comfortable in a simulated reality, the notion that ignorance is bliss. The red pill, conversely, enables him to confront the harsh truth of reality and embark on the quest for self-realization. The pure typically chooses the blue pill. Those who struggle to commit to work, form satisfying relationships, maintain educational discipline, or carry the weight of responsibility, or who feel their life has become meaningless, will find integrating the archetype of eternal youth invaluable to their existence. Marie-Louise von Franz's exploration. In her book Puer Aeternus, a psychological study of the adult struggle with the paradise of childhood, Jungian analyst Marie-Louise von Franz provides an in-depth exploration of the Puer Aeternus phenomenon. The negative manifestation of the Puer Aeternus refers to a young man who remains too long in adolescence, typically coupled with excessive dependence on the mother. While a mother's natural response is to protect her child, when the child is kept too long in the comfort of the nest, he becomes unable to face life's trials and tribulations upon growing up. He therefore flees from the cold, cruel world and seeks his childhood within the nourishing and protective circle of the mother, the unconscious temptation to return to the womb. This dynamic creates a mother complex. The Puer is the man-child who refuses to grow up, take responsibility, and face life's challenges. He expects other people, typically his parents, to solve all his problems. Since he lacks enthusiasm for learning, he never develops a proper understanding of anything. Von Franz writes, "Such people usually have great difficulty in finding a job, for whatever they find is never quite right or quite what they wanted. There is always a hair in the soup. The woman is never quite the right woman. She is nice as a girlfriend, but there is always a but which prevents marriage or any kind of commitment. The refusal to live fully. The Puer remains acutely aware of life's transience, so he never gives himself wholeheartedly to any experience. He knows the end will bring disappointment and parting. The Puer constantly prepares to say goodbye, which ironically makes the experience's end more likely, thus erroneously reinforcing his beliefs even further. It represents a typical pathological reaction. The Puer trains himself not to suffer by anticipating suffering. He anticipates disappointment to avoid the blow, which amounts to a refusal to live. Though it seems rational to him, This excessive thinking becomes a disease. He becomes trapped in his own reflective hyperconsciousness, a self-created bubble that isolates him from life. One of the problems is that if the Puer enters life, then he must face the fact that he is entering upon his own mortality and the corruptible world. He must realize his own death. That is a variation of the old mythological motif, where after leaving paradise, which is a kind of archetypal maternal womb, man falls into the realization of his incompleteness, his corruptibility, and his mortality. The Puer typically exists in a sleepy daze, making one feel inclined to pour a bucket of cold water over his head. However, this is merely an outer aspect. Looking deeper reveals a cherished fantasy life within. The Puer may become megalomaniacal, thinking of himself as someone special and exceptional, a hidden genius, or the next great philosopher, yet he has no tangible product to demonstrate his genius. He is an artist without art. The Puer engages in daydreaming and passive fantasy, which differs significantly from Jung's technique of active imagination. Research shows that daydreaming about success, rather than visualizing failure, can actually increase one's proneness to failure. Jung writes, "The Puer typically leads a provisional life due to the fear of being caught in a situation from which it might not be possible to escape. Plans for the future slip away in fantasies of what will be, what could be. While no decisive action is taken to change, he covets independence and freedom, chafes at boundaries and limits, and tends to find any restriction intolerable." The provisional life. The provisional life describes an attitude toward existence that is largely imaginary, not rooted in the here and now. The person harbors a peculiar attitude and feeling that his job, house, car, creative endeavor, sex, or relationship isn't yet what is really wanted. They are mere placeholders until the real thing arrives someday. Jung described it as the modern European disease of the merely imaginary life. The Puer avoids commitment and responsibility because they require a structured lifestyle. He escapes into the world of fantasy to find temporary comfort. The Puer attempts to fly as high as possible away from reality, ending up like Peter Pan, the boy who wouldn't grow up, who lives in Neverland, a place where people cease to age and remain eternally young. The Puer Aeternus is also known as Peter Pan syndrome. This has become an increasingly common problem in our modern age. Such a person lacks a sense of identity, resulting in disquieting feelings of fragmentation and worthlessness. The Puer compensates through behavior that pursues the ecstatic high in drugs, alcohol, sex, sport, and daredevil escapades, experiences that transcend the inner depression, threatening fragmentation, granting an illusion of selfhood that underlies his restless search for stability and harmony. The person living provisionally becomes alienated from his own reality, spending time ruminating on fantasies that go nowhere and achieve nothing. In the ancient Greek fable, the astrologer who fell into a well, Thales of Miletus, considered the first philosopher, is said to have been so lost in thought that while gazing at the stars, he fell into a well. How can one have knowledge of the heavenly things above if one knows not what lies beneath one's feet? While the Puer possesses vivid imagination, he cannot transform these insights into action because he lives in an ethereal realm and misses the blood and guts of earthly life. As a result, the Puer achieves little success in life. Von Franz writes, "In actuality, for instance, he gets up at 10:30 a.m., hangs around till lunchtime with a cigarette in his mouth, giving way to his emotions and fantasies. In the afternoon he means to do some work, but first he goes out with friends and then with a girl, and the evening is spent in long discussion about the meaning of life. He then goes to bed at 1, and the next day is a repetition of the one before. In that way, the capacity for life and the inner riches are wasted, for they cannot get into something meaningful, but slowly overgrow the real personality. The individual walks about in a cloud of fantasies which in themselves are interesting and full of rich possibilities, full of unlived life. You feel that such a person has a tremendous wealth and capacity, but there's no possibility of finding a means of realization. The Puer usually possesses great capacity to assimilate content and listen, creating the impression he will implement what he learns. But he never applies the concepts he has absorbed, for he isn't grounded enough in reality. It's a trick the Puer performs. The realization that he should adapt to reality becomes merely an intellectual idea that he fulfills in fantasy but not in reality. Though it might seem simple, the Puer cannot cross the border from fantasy to action, grounding in earth. The word human derives from the Latin word humus, meaning earth. To be human is to be humble, down to earth, and grounded in earthly experience, which contains a rich source of nutrients that heal us. The Puer resembles Icarus, who in Greek mythology is warned about hubris and instructed not to fly too close to the sunday. However, he ignores this warning and flies so close to the sun that his wings melt. He falls from the sky, plunges into the sea, and drowns. Jung writes, "The provisional life, where one does not exist really, they are only a spectator, so any experience is ghost-like, perfectly abstract, without a trace of realization." Jung recounts the story of a 5-year-old woman with an extreme case of provisional life that led to her suicide. She proved absolutely inaccessible. She lived things, she did things, but she didn't know what she was living. No matter how hard Jung tried, nothing touched her because she had no relation to the world at all. A few months later, she shot herself. Jung writes, "I saw the corpse. She had shot herself through the heart in the street and had not lost consciousness for a minute or two. The expression on her face was completely altered. For a long time I stood watching her face and asking myself, what kind of expression is that? It was the most extraordinary. The expression of someone who was convinced, say, that a thing was black, and to whom it was very important that it was black, but to whom one had finally proven that it was red, and it was as if she suddenly realized it was red. It was a look full of bewilderment and a sort of pleasant surprise. I saw what happened. At the moment when she shot herself, she understood what life was for the first time. Sometimes people must injure themselves severely to awaken to what life really is. This demonstrates how deeply unconscious people often remain. The inner world must complement the outer world, and vice versa. Over-reliance on the inner world, where the ego cannot escape Neverland, makes advancing into adulthood impossible. As this becomes increasingly critical, the unconscious begins to seep in and threatens to overwhelm and drown the ego. Whatever one has within oneself but does not live, grows against one. The opposite extreme. There are also children who mature too early and grow up very quickly, the extreme opposite of the pure. These are neglected children. Life's hardships have forced them to become excessively realistic, independent, and disillusioned. You can generally tell from a bitter and falsely mature expression that something went wrong. They were pushed out of the childhood world too soon. Such people cannot love or trust anybody. In that situation, life has no meaning because they have lost the magical aspect of eternal youth. They always feel not quite real, only half alive. In therapy, the analyst faces the difficult task of guiding them back to their childish fantasies in order to address them correctly. Positive qualities of the eternal child. The eternal child also contains many positive qualities, a spirituality that comes from close contact with the unconscious. The pure is agreeable, possesses the charm of youth, and initiates invigorating and deep conversations. He appears as the divine child who symbolizes newness, potential for growth, and hope for the future. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this importance. In fact, he considered the child to be the final metamorphosis in becoming who one is. He writes, "The child is innocence and forgetfulness, a new beginning, a game, a self-propelling wheel, a first motion, a sacred yes. For the game of creating, my brothers, a sacred yes to life is needed. What is meant by the inner child is that which is born from the maturity of the adult. It is not regression toward an infantile state of life, but progression toward wholeness. We all have an inner child within us, even older people, who sometimes appear to return to the childlike state of innocence. The eternal youth is one who is immersed in the moment and filled with wonder and playfulness, giving way to pure creativity. He is a yes-sayer, the pinnacle of life affirmation. He brings the heavenly realm into his earthly existence. A passage from the Bible reads, "Verily I say unto you, except ye be converted, and become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven." The Senex, the old man archetype. As we grow older, we enter the world of the Senex, Latin for old man. He too possesses positive and negative aspects. Positively, he is a balanced person who is grounded, patient, conscientious, risk-averse, and controlled. Here he appears as the archetype of the wise old man. The negative side of the Senex manifests as cynicism, rigidity, materialism, reluctance to change, and a lack of humor. The Senex stands opposite to the Puer archetype, though they must be seen as opposite sides of the same coin. We recognize youth by knowing age. We become aware of aging by remembering how we were when young. Jung writes, "The Puer's shadow is the Senex, associated with the god Apollo, disciplined, controlled, responsible, rational, ordered. Conversely, the shadow of the Senex is the Puer, related to Dionysus, unbounded, instinct, disorder, intoxication, whimsy. The Puer dreams big. The Senex works hard. The ratio of one to the other varies from person to person. Both archetypes live within us, and both are necessary for a psychologically healthy life. A one-sided imbalance in either direction is inadvisable." The Puer and Senex maintain different versions of play. While the Puer enjoys sports, socializing, games, eating out, going to the movies, all non-tangible products, the Senex feels that play involves engaging in non-work activities that produce tangible results: painting, cooking, writing, building, and so on. Jung's personal experience. Jung was primarily a Senex. He would make sculptures, carve inscriptions on stone, draw mandalas, and create the Red Book, filled with images from the unconscious. During one of the most difficult periods of his life, what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, Jung felt a psychic disturbance within himself and went twice through all his childhood memories trying to find its cause. But this retrospection led to nothing but a fresh acknowledgement of his own ignorance. He said to himself, "Since I know nothing at all, I shall simply do whatever occurs to me." He writes, "The first thing that came to the surface was a childhood memory from perhaps my 10th or 11th year. At that time I had a spell of playing passionately with building blocks. I distinctly recalled how I had built little houses and castles. These structures had fascinated me for a long time. To my astonishment, this memory was accompanied by a good deal of emotion. Aha, I said to myself, there is still life in these things. The small boy is still around and possesses a creative life, which I lack, but how can I make my way to it?" Jung realized he had been neglecting his inner child. He felt humiliated to realize he had to play childish games in his old age. Nevertheless, he started gathering stones and slowly built a miniature village. He went to his building game after the noon meal every day until his patients arrived, and if he finished with his work early enough in the evening, he returned to building. In the course of this activity, his thoughts clarified, and he felt a source of creativity, enthusiasm, and a sense of renewal. He wrote, "This moment was a turning point in my fate. I had only the inner certainty that I was on the way to discovering my own myth, for the building game was only a beginning." It released a stream of fantasies, which I later carefully wrote down. Jung's most ambitious project of Senec's play was building the tower, situated at Bollingen, a product of 12 years of work. It is a solitary place surrounded by nature near Lake Zurich. He would spend several months there each year, nourishing his soul. He wrote, "At Bollingen I am in the midst of my true life. I am most deeply myself." The Little Prince, a case study. The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry is one of the most well-known books in the world. Saint-Exupéry displays all the typical features of the Puer Aeternus, which doesn't alter the fact that he was also a great writer. He worked as a professional aviator and died during World War II in an airplane crash. When he was not allowed to fly, he always became depressed, pacing in his flat from morning till evening, desperate and irritated. In the book, Saint-Exupéry begins with an introduction resembling part of a personal autobiographical account. The book is based on the imagination of children and is very dreamlike. The narrator starts by saying that at age 6, he read about boa constrictors swallowing their prey whole without chewing, after which they are unable to move and sleep through the 6 months needed for digestion. His first drawing, which looks ordinary, contains the entire mystery of Saint-Exupéry's life within it. He shows his masterpiece to the grown-ups and asks whether the drawing frightened them, but they say, "Why should anyone be frightened by a hat?" But his drawing was not a picture of a hat, it was a picture of a boa constrictor digesting an elephant. Since they were unable to understand it, he made another drawing. He draws the inside of the boa constrictor so they can see the elephant clearly, since adults always need to have things explained. The grown-ups respond by advising him to lay aside his drawings and focus on studying arithmetic, geography, grammar, and so on. That is why, at age 6, he gave up what might have been a magnificent career as a painter. He then chose another profession and learned to pilot airplanes, flying all over the world. Whenever he met a grown-up, he would show them drawing number 1 to find out if that person was of true understanding, but they would always say it looks like a hat. So he lived his whole life alone, without anyone he could really talk to, until he had an accident with his plane in the desert. This experience links with his personal life, in which he nearly died of thirst and experienced hallucinations. As he was trying to fix the plane, he heard an odd little voice say, "If you please draw me a sheep." It was the Little Prince, who had come down from the stars. He shows him the hat, and the Little Prince says he doesn't want a boa constrictor that swallowed an elephant, he wants a sheep. This magical being from the unconscious is the first person he has met who understood him. However, he doesn't know how to draw a sheep, and after several failures, he draws a box instead, and, in tricksterish fashion, says the sheep he wants is inside it, for he is too busy trying to fix the engine of his plane. This symbolizes the conflict between the demands of the inner and outer life, which poses tremendous tension. A common thing a Puer does is put all his plans in a box and store them away in a gesture of boredom and impatience. This is the great danger. Perhaps the most important thing a Puer can do is take something seriously and stick to it. This first part of the novella contains the whole problem of the Puer Aeternus in a nutshell. We see that Saint-Exupéry never really got used to living in the world of adults. He was experiencing depression and disillusionment. It was as if his unconscious were telling him he must participate in the world and cannot always escape the unimaginative and banal world of everyday life. He felt as if his soul had been completely dried up and that he was dying of thirst, hence the image of the desert. This midlife crisis leads to conscious absent-mindedness, and one little mistake can cost one's life. The adult world lacks the enchantment of nature and the magic found in fairy tales. It is totally dead. Saint-Exupéry writes, "I know a planet where there is a certain red-faced gentleman. He has never smelt a flower. He has never looked at a star. He has never loved anyone. He has never done anything in his life but add up figures. And all day he says over and over, just like you, I am busy with matters of consequence, and that makes him swell up with pride. Saint-Exupéry speaks about the emptiness, idiocy, and meaninglessness of adulthood, contrasting it with childhood life as the fantasy life, the artist's life, the true life. All the rest is empty persona running after making money, making a prestigious impression on other people, and having lost one's true nature. The great problem is that he has not found a bridge by which he could take over the true life into adult life. The English poet William Wordsworth wrote about this poignantly. There was a time when meadow, grove, and stream, the earth, and every common sight, to me did seem, apparelled in celestial light, the glory and the freshness of a dream. It is not now as it hath been of yore. Turn wheresoe'er I may, by night or day, the things which I have seen, I now can see no more. Shades of the prison house begin to close upon the growing boy. At length the man perceives it die away and fade into the light of common day. The fundamental question is, how can one grow up without losing the feeling of totality, the feeling of creativeness, magic, and of being really alive that one had in youth? What is really occurring in Saint-Exupéry's life is that his greater personality has been devoured by the mother, which suffocates life and prevents the human being from development and growth. One is permanently in the womb and never leaves the mother's protective shell to enter the adult world. The great mother becomes the devouring mother, like the Hindu goddess Kali. Saint-Exupéry never embarks on the hero's journey, and that is the meaning of the elephant in the drawing The Greatest Hero in Africa. In contrast to other mythological parallels, the swallowed hero cannot find his way out of his predator. The elephant is generous, intelligent, taciturn, but irritable and inclined to terrible moods and fits of rage, which can only be appeased by music, not by sensual pleasures. Amazingly, these were also the outstanding qualities of Saint-Exupéry. The elephant is the image in his soul of what he wanted to become, and it swallowed back by the devouring mother the regressive tendencies of the unconscious, and later by death. But Saint-Exupéry did not know that, though von Franz says he came very close. Integration and cure. To integrate the Puer Aeternus, one must bring oneself down to earth, not by adopting a one-sided view of fantasy life, but rather by exposing oneself to daily life, chores, and hard work. The pure must also merge with the crowd, becoming the sheep that Saint-Exupéry put into a box, though this isn't without its dangers. A dangerous situation is cured by a dangerous situation. However, it is the antidote for a mother complex. Normally, very few young men possess strong enough individuality to pull away from the mother of their own accord. They do it via collectivity. This is the first step of the cure. It is only by immersing oneself in society that one can experience the warmth of human beings, have relatedness, and a sense of being part of a tribe that transcends individual desires and needs. The second step is that the pure must take care not to lose himself in the crowd. He must simultaneously sacrifice his inflated specialness and megalomania, which is his fake individuality, while not losing his real individuality by becoming a mere number in the crowd. This can be achieved by balancing one's social life with one's spiritual life. If one never spends time alone, one may never build an indestructible foundation which is crucial for self-realization. Nietzsche wrote, "When I am among the many, I live as the many do, and I do not think as I really think. After a time, it always seems as though they want to banish me from myself and rob me of my soul, and I grow angry with everybody and fear everybody. I then require the desert so as to grow good again." Life's phases and priorities. Jung likened the human lifespan to the passage of the sun over the course of 12 hours. The sun rises and we begin the day birth. The sun rises in the sky. We grow from infancy to youth to young adulthood. The sun reaches the zenith at noontime midlife. the peak of our abilities, vigor, and, if we have been on the right path, career success. Then the sun begins to lose its altitude, we begin to age, until it finally sets, we die. These phases of life have different priorities and specific types of psychology. For Jung, the priority of the first half of life is strengthening the ego, work, education, relationships, and so on. It is only in the second half of life that we are sufficiently anchored in reality and our focus shifts to our inner world, to our quest for individuation. An imbalance in this transition is often the start of a midlife crisis, the cry of the soul for growth. Jung writes, "The significance of the morning of life undoubtedly lies in the development of the individual, our entrenchment in the outer world, the propagation of our kind, and the care of our children. This is the obvious purpose of nature. Whoever carries over into the afternoon of life the law of the morning, or the natural aim, must pay for it with damage to his soul. Just as surely as a growing youth who tries to carry over his childish egoism into adult life must pay for this mistake with social failure. The cure through work." Jung tells us that to cure the neurosis of the Puer, one must work. This is the most disagreeable word for Puer because he must sacrifice the wonder of the fantasy realm to a conventional life requiring commitment and responsibility. It seems like utter madness to him because he is letting go of his specialness. The crucial step is that he must drive out his devils, while being careful not to also drive out his angels. This can only be achieved by focusing on both the inner world and the outer world, which is the purpose of individuation. Through work, the Puer may actually become exceptional in reality, not in fantasy. It doesn't matter if one has no idea which job is the right one or what one really wants to do, one must stick with any kind of job and immerse oneself in the outer world. Søren Kierkegaard calls this type of anxiety the dizziness of freedom, the vertigo that comes from having to choose from a sea of infinite possibilities. Here one may either lose himself in the finite, becoming an imitation of other people, or lose oneself in the infinite, a state of analysis paralysis, where one thinks of all the possibilities but never acts. The Puer usually tries various different jobs, but never sticks to one, quitting when it becomes too boring. While he can work, he'll find it a chore. This is because he is working completely uphill in opposition to his own flow of energy. The Puer knows that everything goes wrong because he is lazy, but he cannot want not to be lazy, and so he remains in depression. We all possess a great storage of enthusiasm kept hidden as long as we do not integrate the archetype of eternal youth. The unconscious indicates the direction in which there might be some enthusiasm or where energy flows naturally, for it is, of course, easier to train oneself to work in a direction supported by one's instinct. Nevertheless, in every field of work, there always comes a time when routine must be faced. All work, even creative work, contains a certain amount of boring routine, which is when the Puer complains. When asked how one should live, Jung wrote, "There is no single definite way for the individual. If you want to go on your individual way, it is the way you make for yourself, which is never prescribed, which you do not know in advance, and which simply comes into being of itself when you put one foot in front of the other. If you always do the next thing that needs to be done, you will go most safely and sure-footedly along the path prescribed by your unconscious. Then it is naturally no help at all to speculate about how you ought to live." Jung tells us we shouldn't spend time in useless speculation and waste our energy and resources by thinking of how to live, but rather to toil the soil directly in front of us. As such, we are always doing something meaningful and intended by fate. The hero's journey. The Puer denies the call to adventure in the hero's journey, which separates the person from the aspects of their previous life and causes anxiety. He remains in the stage of refusal, and cannot leave the ordinary world to enter the special world, where he must confront his dragon, his worst fear, event, person, situation, or memory long avoided. Thus, he cannot access his reward, a treasure chest full of inner gold guarded by the dragon. The pure remains in perpetual stagnation because he cannot acquire the insight that comes from psychological death and rebirth, the death of one's old self and the birth of a new and more capable self, without which there's no individuation at all. In some Native American rituals, young boys are gathered by the men and taken out in the middle of the night, dragged off into the wilderness where they must pass trials for their initiation into manhood. This is the beginning of the hero's journey. If he succeeds in slaying his dragon, he re-enters the community as a man who has left the realm of childhood. Manhood is different from being a man. It is a badge of honor one must earn. It creates a sense of autonomy and growth in ego strength, a sense of belongingness, purpose, and meaning. That's something missing in a Puer, who is often driven by a desire for safety and divided by or pleasure. Jung writes, "For the hero, fear is a challenge and a task, because only boldness can deliver from fear. And if the risk is not taken, the meaning of life is somehow violated, and the whole future is condemned to hopeless staleness, to a drab grey lit only by the willow, the wisps. Initiation invites us to throw ourselves into the fire of life. In modern times, we lack these tribal initiations that were so important to our ancestors, and many men opt for alternatives such as military service or the so-called gym bro mentality. Some young men hope that something in life will carry them off from the painful and mundane day-to-day existence, like being thrown on an island where one must survive by building a fire, shelter, hunting for food, and so on. This is both terrifying and exhilarating. In psychological terms, they are waiting for an archetype to activate in the psyche and help orient them in life. For a young woman, it is marriage and childbearing that conquers the puella. There is a sacrificial moment where, in order to incarnate the archetype of the mother, she must put the archetype of Aphrodite on the sacrificial altar and accept the fact that her body is going to look very different and that she is going to feel different after giving birth to a child. This enormous responsibility of motherhood often causes the death of the puella, though this doesn't mean there aren't cases where a mother is still a puella or a woman without children who is not a puella. Working with dreams. Dreams are an important source for integrating the Puer. When the inner child appears in dreams, it's always simultaneously behind us and ahead of us. Behind us is the infantile shadow, that which always pulls us backward into being infantile, dependent, lazy, escaping problems, responsibility, and life. It must be sacrificed for us to become the hero. The child God that is ahead of us means renewal, the possibility of life continually growing and expanding. When our ego attitude changes, the dreams respond. We can influence dreams by writing them down and giving meaning to them, and by drawing and coloring them. This helps us amplify the contents of the dream and bring the imaginary figures into reality. And the unconscious realizes that one does this because it changes too. Dream images can be used in active imagination, where you enter your inner picture while being conscious and continue to live in it and transform it, giving it new life. Dreams tell us what to do with our lives, and we don't have to worry when we don't understand a dream, because a dream understands us. Swiss artist Peter Berghäuser had a dream of the pure Aeternus and made a painting. A wonderful, divine boy rides an extremely powerful wild horse. He comes from cosmic distances, from the boundless universe, in other words, from the collective unconscious. He rides through the space of the psyche like a new star in the heavens. It is an encounter with the archetype of the self. He has 4 arms, and out of one hand grows a magical 8-pointed flower, or he's holding it. The boy embodies quaternity. the universal expression of spiritual totality and characteristic of most images of the divinity, an example of integration. The English poet and visionary artist William Blake is an example of an individuated person having integrated his pure Aeternus. He reminds us that if the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite, opening us up to the mystery of the inner and the outer life. I feel that a man may be happy in this world, and I know that this world is a world of imagination and vision. I see everything I paint in this world, but everybody does not see alike. The tree which moves some to tears of joy is in the eyes of others only a green thing which stands in the way. As a man is, so he sees.